Welcome everyone from every corner of the world for another edition of our conversations with OSS, the McGill Office for Science and Society, about COVID-19 plus more, whatever may come up. Joining me today, Emily Shore, Jonathan Jerry from our office, and our special guest, Dr. Debbie Schwarcz. Debbie is a family physician, but also emergency physician. She works out of a hospital here in Montreal. She has 3 small kids, and obviously is very aware of everything that is going on, is very concerned about everything that is going on, and is going to bring us up to date on what she sees happening in Montreal right now as we have transitioned into what is called a red zone. So Debbie,
but you forgot her most important cred, one of them. Her last name is Schwarcz.
Yes, it's a remarkable coincidence, and she
right.
it correctly. She spells
Look at that.
Yes, unlike the Smoke Meat Emporium here in Montreal, who spells their name wrong.
Right.
So
welcome, Debbie.
What does red zone mean?
Well, so the red zone basically means that we're in the most, like the highest alert level. So there's a really high risk of spread of COVID. There's a very high rate of transmission and a high number of cases. So what this has meant for the province of Quebec is that, well, so certain regions of Quebec are in this red zone, including Montreal, which is where we are. And so what it means for us basically is we're not quite at the lockdown level as we were back in March, but we're pretty close, in which many businesses have been forced to close for the month of October. And all gatherings have been prohibited, and even including gatherings in your home, even having just one person over unless they're coming as a caretaker. But fortunately for us and for our kids, schools are still open.
So is that a fortunately?
Sorry?
Is that a fortunately?
Clearly, I think so.
Have you seen anything more in the hospital in terms of increased cases?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an uptick in cases, and we feel it for sure. We feel it both in the volume of our patients, and also we're seeing more and more COVID. Although I have to say that from what I'm seeing, granted, I should mention that I do work in it's a community emergency room, and it's part of a bigger academic center, but we do see patients with COVID. We don't hang on to them at this point. Which means that if we do have somebody requiring admission, we will arrange to have them transferred to another hospital. But we definitely are seeing an uptick in cases, and a lot of what I'm seeing are generally well people with COVID, meaning that they're ambulatory, they're walking in, and they're able to be discharged home. But with that being said, there is, I know that the ICUs at the hospitals that do treat COVID and keep their patients with COVID are definitely, the beds are filling up.
So you don't have anyone in your hospital intubated for COVID?
So once, if that's the case, that they end up getting intubated for COVID, we transfer them out. So we stabilize them and we arrange for transfer. So, I mean, currently right now, I don't think so. I mean, obviously I'm not at work, but absolutely this is something that happens.
And what meds are you guys using before you transfer?
So the patient with COVID will still get antibiotics while on spec, and steroids as well.
Okay, well, that brings up an interesting case about dexamethasone. Many people are familiar with this drug as Decadron. It's adrenocorticosteroid, which means that it's one of the compounds that is synthesized based on naturally occurring hormones produced by the adrenal gland. and it has anti-inflammatory properties and anti-immune properties, and is widely used for a large variety of conditions. And of course, it's been in the news because President Trump was getting dexamethasone right from the beginning. So one of the questions that has come up is if someone has very low-grade symptoms, is it appropriate to right away start dexamethasone?
So, I mean, we do have criteria to follow for the initiation of dexamethasone. So we wouldn't generally start it for a patient with mild symptoms. So it is used for moderate to severe symptoms. And there are a couple of different criteria which we use to help classify the patients, one of which is the oxygen saturation level and their respiratory rate. So I can't comment obviously on whether or not we would have started Decadron on Trump, since I don't know what his oxygen saturation and respiratory rate was, in addition to his other vital signs.
Well, that's one of the problems, is that there was just not enough information that was released, so that even experts are having a difficult time commenting on that. And also, of course, he was given the monoclonal antibody treatment. This was specifically the product produced by Regeneron, which is a pharmaceutical biotech company. It's not the only company, of course, that's working on monoclonal antibodies. I mean, monoclonal antibodies are one of the fastest growing areas of research, and also applications in many conditions. And I think maybe we should just clarify a little bit here about what monoclonal antibodies are.
I was just going to ask you, what are they? Explain.
Jonathan, you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, it's not my area of specialty, but basically our body naturally produces these antibodies. These are Y-shaped molecules that will bind very specifically to parts of microorganisms that are causing disease, like viruses and bacteria and all that kind of stuff. What we have been able to do now in the lab is to essentially artificially create antibodies and to use, at first it was a mouse model and then they became humanized, but essentially these are artificial antibodies that are made against very, very specific targets, and they've been used for a variety of diseases, especially autoimmune diseases. You can't typically take them by mouth because as they go through the digestive tract, they would get digested. So you typically would inject them. And what they do is that they will bind to a specific part of a cascade that will lead to a disease, like an autoimmune condition. Now, in that particular case, I forget exactly what this one is, but I mean, I'm assuming that it is an antibody that is against the spike protein of the coronavirus. So essentially, you're kind of instead of the human body sort of taking its time and making its own antibodies against the coronavirus, you are giving it a head start by giving the patient these antibodies that are already targeting this coronavirus. But again, it is experimental.
The general procedure that many companies are working on is to take the spike protein from the coronavirus, inject it into either a mouse or into a hamster. Hamsters seem to be preferred. And the certain cells in the animal, the B cells, will then start cranking out the antibodies. They isolate the cells which are producing these antibodies, and they hybridize them with a tumor cell, which grows very, very quickly. So these hybrid cells will multiply very, very quickly. Then from there they isolate the antibodies, clone them so that you can copy them. You can produce large numbers of antibodies, which are now very specific for this particular protein. And it's pretty well experimental. The study that they used based on which Trump was given this involved 275 people. It's not a very, very large study, but the early results are optimistic. And of course, it's very plausible. I mean, all the theory makes sense that if you give this early enough, then you're going to get a positive reaction because the antibodies will neutralize the virus. So it's very interesting. Of course, it's very, very expensive. And this is not something that can be rolled out and millions of people can get this. And obviously the President of the United States does not receive the same kind of treatment as an average person would get. So it would not be surprising that this actually had an effect. But what is also interesting, and Debbie can comment on this, is that now there are reports from the president's doctor that they are finding that he has antibodies in his system against against the virus. So Debbie, you want to comment on that?
I mean, so basically that his doctor has come out stating, look, Donald Trump is now immune to coronavirus. I mean, obviously this is ridiculous because he received antibodies, and then a couple of days later, they checked his antibodies, and guess what? He had antibodies. Yeah, because he received them. So I want to just kind of make an analogy here. You know, somebody who, let's say, is bleeding out and is anemic, and you give them a blood transfusion, right? And then the next day, guess what? You do a blood test and you check their CBC to see if they have hemoglobin. And guess what? They have red blood cells. I mean, it's not exactly
because that's expected.
It's expected
with what you did.
You just gave it to him.
Exactly.
So it's a reminder to us to be very wary of the information that we read and the information that's presented to us in the media.
I think it's the presentation of the information also, because the fact that, you know, he said that and it was, you know, with like, wow, he is antibody. Well, obviously, like, let's look at the before, right? So it's the critical thinking piece when getting information. Exactly.
There's also been some issue with his statement about the X-rays that the president had, which you know, they were not willing to comment on whether, you know, they saw any pneumonia in those X-rays, because the only comment was, yes, there were expected findings. Well, Debbie, isn't the expected finding that there would be some semblance of pneumonia?
I mean, there is a finding that is expected in COVID. It has a general presentation. It looks a lot like congestive heart failure on the chest X-ray, whereas a pneumonia usually presents itself as like a consolidation, an infiltrate. So it does look a little bit different, but it's always possible to have both as well. So I'm not sure why. I mean, it just sounds like there was a lot of not a lot of information given. But at the same time, I mean, I suppose he is entitled to patient confidentiality as well, despite the fact that he's the president of the United States.
He's also getting zinc. He's also getting vitamin D. He's also getting melatonin, and apparently low dose aspirin as well. So they're really throwing everything but the kitchen sink in there. And so it's going to be interesting to see just how this plays out.
I mean, I imagine, again, if any president, you know, if this happened in the Obama years or whatever, you do all that you can, you know, to keep your president healthy. And I imagine that's why they're throwing everything at the kitchen sink. The only issue is when someone in this administration, and especially the president, has made any sign of, you know, going into a hospital or being sick as a weakness. That's where the covering up or the presentation of information gets blurry. And, you know, because you can't, and the blurring of fact and fiction and what's true and what's not, because there's just such, you know, this weakness perceived in showing how things really are, when really you could just present how things are and probably would get more sympathy and empathy from
also,
both sides of this.
They should, you know, certainly state that this really is experimental treatment. I mean, nobody has gotten Regeneron's monoclonal antibodies and remdesivir at the same time, especially when they're also getting zinc and vitamin D and melatonin. So you don't know what the possible combination here is. So we have here a study of N=1, which of course doesn't mean much in science, but it is anyway interesting.
He also, in his video yesterday, you remember, he said it was, you know, he was referring to it as therapeutics, but he said, I know they're called therapeutics, but I like to think of it as a treatment because it treated me, but they are, I mean, that was bizarre also.
And of course, he also mentioned that now he may be immune, which of course is possible, but the fact is that we don't know. And, you know, this brings up also the concept of herd immunity. I mean, everyone is talking about this. I think talking a bit too much, because the concept of herd immunity assumes that you do actually develop immunity after being exposed to this particular virus. And so far, I mean, there's very sketchy evidence about that. There certainly is accumulating evidence that people can be reinfected. It's not just one single case anymore. There are many cases of people who have been reinfected. And also, when monitored how long the antibodies last, it seems that they don't last more than a few months. So the whole idea of herd immunity has to be called into question when we don't really know that anyone actually develops immunity after being exposed to this virus. Anyway, let's switch for a moment to the topic of masks, because it's controversial, although of course it should not be controversial. But we see people out there demonstrating and burning masks and saying that they impinge on their personal liberties. Well, I mean, as far as personal liberties go, there are many things that we accept as being controlled by authorities. I mean, you can't just go and publicly urinate in a park, right? I mean, you don't do that. So I mean, obviously there are things that one because of social consciousness you abide by, but there's more and more evidence about the benefits of wearing masks, and the anti-maskers say, show me the evidence. No, there is not one single study that proves it. But when you look at all of the studies now that are ongoing and have been done with masks, there's just no question that they can cut down on infection. So Debbie, what do you see in the hospital? Well, I know, of course, in the hospital everyone has to wear the mask, but when you're talking to people, especially in the clinic, not in the hospital, but in your family practice, what are they doing? I mean, are they wearing masks as much as possible?
So people are it's mandatory to wear masks both in the clinic and in the hospital. The problem is that a lot of people they feel they clearly are not used to wearing the mask, and they feel uncomfortable wearing it. There's a lot of lifting it to talk to me or taking it off, coming into the room and saying, "Oh, can I take off my mask now?" And I'm like, no,
Right.
The idea is to leave your mask on. So there's a lot of that. And people have, when you feel short of breath and you have a mask over your face, even though, I mean, it's not going to decrease your oxygen saturation level at all. It's the feeling of shortness of breath that makes it really intolerable for a lot of patients. But it is mandatory. Patients are forced to wear it. And I mean, discussing masks, I think that the big controversy over masks is really in the school setting. There's a lot of controversy over that, and why some children, it just seems like it's a random age that has been chosen, that above this age you have to wear a mask, and finally in the latest talk or update that the government has given, they've finally said everyone above grade, so in high school, the masks are mandatory in the classroom setting finally, because they were not mandatory before. They were only mandatory in places where people, when you were walking between classes, but then once you were sitting in the classroom, you could take it off, which I know that a lot of us as physicians found to be quite hypocritical, since we feel that the highest risk is actually sitting in the classroom, where we know that the 2 meter distance can't be held, and also in a lot of these schools the ventilation is extremely poor, and we feel like our kids are put at risk because of that. With that being said, I do not think that schools should close, and I've been very vocal about that. I think that being in school is really important for children. It's important for the parents, for so many different reasons. But I think all of us parents, we feel really strongly that the kids should be remaining in school. I don't worry so much about, and I keep reminding people of this, that, they shouldn't. So, when Donald Trump came out and said, oh, don't be afraid of COVID, it's not so bad. Essentially, that's what he said, right? So obviously that's not true. Obviously, COVID, the mortality associated with COVID is quite high. And it seems to affect people differently. It seems to affect different people differently. And there almost seems to be, in some cases, no rhyme or reason to it. But with that being said, I think that, for the majority of people do recover from it. And I mean, obviously it's left to tell what the long-term effects will be. But I think what is important here is not to look at this on, the personal level, the anxiety over getting COVID, but I think that we need to look at this from the big picture, which is, if everybody gets sick, and then so if everybody gets sick at the same time, and then we have a very large proportion of people that get super sick at the same time, that's going to flood the hospital system. It's going to flood the healthcare system. And that's the big danger with COVID. That's the big danger that we face. And it's been like that since the beginning. And I just think that it's important to remind people of that, because, you have people out there who are so afraid to send their children to school because they think that they're sending their child to, to their death. But that's not the case. And our life is not just COVID. It's not just about COVID. And there's so many other reasons why children should be in school, that I think that, if we sacrifice school, I think we're sacrificing a lot.
But can I ask you something? So you said our life is about other things, and everyone, we're learning how to coexist with COVID also. But then, Quebec, or not all of Quebec, but certain parts of Quebec now, especially as of today, October 8th, gyms are closed, high schools, students have to wear masks. It's coexisting, but it's still going back to things shutting down. But and I've seen your posts on Facebook, and you are vocal in that certain sacrifices have to be made in some areas, and others you still go ahead. So like schools are open, but as a result, when kids come back from school, and parents also have a responsibility, and you stay in your bubble, and you maybe don't see your grandparents anymore because they're in school, right? You're making choices at this point. And that's the coexisting.
I think school is an essential service. And I think it should be, this is if children don't get schooled, this is our future that we're, dealing with, right? This children are our future. Children need to be schooled. They need to be socialized. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of other sacrifices that need to be made. I think that the Quebec government made a big mistake. And I was, vocal about that too. I think that,
with what?
Going back into school in September, I think that there should have been a lot more efforts placed on informing the public of the importance of taking it way back. People got very comfortable over the summer. They felt free, they got the smell of freedom. People got together. They had barbecues in their backyard. And
outside
for the most part, but inside as well, as gatherings of 10 people were allowed.
Right.
And people got very comfortable with that. And also, the rate was very good. It was very well controlled. And I said that when school started again, of course we were going to get an increase in cases. We knew that was to be expected. And that's why it was so important to take it way back within the community and stop, gathering, and stop behaving in a way where we were going to start spreading it outside of the school. But I think that, people didn't do that. They felt really comfortable during the summer. And I don't fully blame them, because, the directives from the government were really confusing and were not strict enough. And they did too, like, it was too late by the time they kind of clued in. And it just sort of feels like, what are they doing? It seems like it was obvious to so many of us that we were going to get a second wave. We knew it. So I don't know why it wasn't planned for better. I don't know why gatherings of 250 people were allowed. I think that should have never been allowed. I think that also there's so many rules that are put in place with so many details that are just don't make any sense. You know, you could be 10 people, but only from 3 families. And, you know, like, I think that people just kind of gave up because it was too confusing. And I think that that's a big shame, because I think that the majority of cases, at least in our community, are coming from not from school, but they're coming from private gatherings. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that here we are 2 weeks after the Jewish New Year and we're seeing an increase in cases. I think that people were misinformed. And as we talked about, the, you know, putting up the tents outside, for example, I think that it was, you're trying to get around it somehow, but really it was essentially the same thing.
Well, so, I guess we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, but by Yom Kippur, all that was stopped. But even aside from the synagogues, which I know, you know, different ones did different things. I know ours was extremely strict, and it was very over the top. But I actually think good for the first holiday. For the second, it was canceled. I do still think, like you said, there were private gatherings of dinners of you know, in people's homes, and there was a lot of bubbles.
There were. I know that there were.
Right.
And that's, the cases are coming now, and I see it. Like, this is not just you know, statistics at this point, because my kids go to school and because they're in a couple of different schools, I do see it. And you know, I think that it's really important. I don't mean to blame anybody, and I most definitely don't want people who have COVID to feel embarrassed or bullied that they're positive. But I think that we should all take a step back and take this as a lesson that, you know, what we do, that we do have a social responsibility, and what we do matters. What each and every person does matters. You know, you may feel like it doesn't. You may feel like, oh, I'm just one person. What am I going to do? What difference am I going to make? But I think that we need a reminder that every single person is important in this situation. And we're in this really unique time where we are reliant on other people in order to survive, essentially.
You know, these numbers, the 10, the 25, 250, are pulled out of a hat.
Exactly. They're very random.
There's no scientific evidence for this whatsoever. The only scientific evidence we have, you take someone who doesn't have COVID, you put them in a room, don't allow them to communicate with anyone, you can guarantee that they will not get COVID. This is the only scientific evidence that that we have.
It also, that's why it annoys me at the press conferences with the different, you know, ministers and everything, when I know the reporters have to ask, but, you know, they're asking the question, so explain, can we do this? Can this person do this? Or if you see on Facebook saying, well, can I bring my kid to whatever? The answer really is like, no. Don't do anything. Like, stop. If you're asking the question and there's that element of doubt, or you're just take precaution for yourself, for others, and you're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to go to work and go to school right now and come home.
Well, you know, Debbie was saying that we need to educate our kids, which obviously is the fact. But we also need to educate adults, because there's so many out there who are just going off on all kinds of tangents. You know, there's still people who are neurotic about, you know, wiping every grocery item that comes into their house, when we know that you do not get COVID by that. I mean, that would have shown up already. That just doesn't happen. Spraying disinfectants all over the place randomly is counterproductive. But the conspiracy theories that are out there have to be addressed. There was a paper that just came out a couple of weeks ago, which is very meaningful, where they looked at the frequency of belief in the theories. And as you know, there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there, especially in the US. The belief that this virus was created in China as a weapon of war and was released. That, you know, Bill Gates is trying to implant microchips into people. And then, of course, the unbelievable notion of the QAnon people who claim that there's some cabal of politicians who were running a pedophile cannibalistic ring out of the basement of a pizza parlor in Washington. Place doesn't even have a basement. Anyway, I mean, it's unbelievable that people can believe this kind of nonsense. But what I'm getting at here is what this paper showed, is that people who believe in these conspiracy theories are much less likely to abide by the scientific information. They are far less likely to wear masks. They are more opposed to vaccination than anyone else. So although, you know, it's sometimes in the scientific community, you pass this off as, you know, these nonsensical beliefs and, you know, so what, let them believe the stupidity, who cares? Well, we all need to care because it's tied into other aspects of their behavior, which affects everyone else. So well, you know, I have my views on all these conspiracy theories. So Jonathan, any new conspiracy theory that you've come across?
No, I mean, I think QAnon is sort of the glue that is holding so many of these conspiracy theories together right now. What I do find interesting, though, is that it's very easy to think of these believers in QAnon as completely scientifically illiterate and complete, you know, idiots. But it is interesting to see. I forget where I saw this, but somebody was actually making the argument that no, it requires a certain level of scientific literacy because again, it's tied to do your own research, and people go finding patterns and matching things together, and of course we all have this predisposition to find patterns even where there are none, and it reminded me of astrology because I just wrote about this for my next piece, where I found a study that showed that well, actually the people who are more likely to believe in astrology are not scientifically illiterate. They have an intermediate level of scientific literacy because there are aspects of astrology that are science-y looking, right? I mean, you have calculations in there, you have these patterns, you have structures and systems. So I think that there is a draw for a lot of people into QAnon. I mean, for a variety of reasons, but I think there is this draw of it's like this story that requires a certain level of scientific thinking of what they believe is scientific thinking, and they go looking for clues. And of course, in times of high stress, you know, people are looking for somebody to blame. You know, we have a hard time with our human brain understanding how viruses naturally mutate, and you know, all of a sudden it jumps into humans because now it has this ability. It's a lot easier to think that there's somebody who's responsible for this, and there are good guys and there are bad guys. And I think that's what QAnon does for a lot of people. It is this narrative, this old school, old timey narrative of good versus evil that people get drawn into, and it's very appealing.
And of course, they try to put a little science into it. One of their arguments is that the reason that they are kidnapping children and massacring them, whatever, is to use their blood to extract from it adrenochrome, which they claim is a life-enhancing, longevity-enhancing substance, which is, of course, is not true in the first place. Adrenochrome does not do that. It does occur in the blood, but it really doesn't do anything. And then they have these pictures of Hillary Clinton before and after, and of course they're fake pictures of what she looks like after she has essentially sucked the blood of children. I mean, this is terrible.
But this is an old anti-Semitic trope, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Blood
it's an
libel.
old anti-Semitic trope. You know, that the Jews will somehow take Christian children and use their blood in ceremonies.
Right.
And this nonsense is now re-emerging. And again, you know, we know that this is not benign, as we witnessed the guy who, with a rifle, went and tried to liberate the children from the pizza parlor in Washington. Yeah. And had he not been stopped, he would have shot up the place. So these are very dangerous beliefs, and they're multiplying, because whenever we have a situation where science doesn't have all of the answers, that's when all of these crazy theories jump in to fill the void. And you know, you mentioned the astrology thing, and yeah, I mean, there are some people who believe because they think there's some science to it. And you know, one argument that they often use is look at the moon and look at the sun; it causes tides, right, on Earth, which is obviously true. And the human body is made of 70% water, and therefore, the planets and the moon can have an effect. Now, of course, this sounds reasonable to someone who doesn't take enough time to look into it, that, first of all, the size of the body relative to the size of the moon is insignificant. And plus, we are not an empty container with water inside of us that can slosh around, except maybe in some cases where that might be true for someone's head. But so, yeah, they try to use these kind of scientific arguments, and the amount of nonsense that is out there is just phenomenal.
Although now with astrology, as I was wading in these waters, a lot of people don't even claim that it is scientific anymore. They fully say, I don't believe it's a science. I don't even believe in it. I just find it useful. It's a language. It's an art form. I can use it for introspection. But one of the problem that arises is if you look at your birth chart and it tells you that the date of your surgery, that your surgery is planned, there's bad omens, don't do it. People might, if you really believe in this, they might postpone these kinds of things, thinking that Mars is going to interfere with my recovery.
Well, yeah, and you have very well-read, intelligent people. You'll meet someone and say, well, what are you? Are you a Capricorn or are you a Cancer? And so, I knew that. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, I knew that you were a Leo, right? Because you don't change your mind easily. Well, we Leos don't believe in such nonsense.
With my due date in April, I've had a few people, and I even forget the sign right now, but they're like, "Oh, that's an Aries. That's really good," or something. I don't even know the sign, and I was
I had my birth chart done by an astrology app on the App Store, and it gives you this 5,000 word essay, right? Because every heavenly body, depending on in which constellation it is, will result in like this 2-paragraph thing about yourself. So you have a lot of text that's generated. And as I start to read it, a lot of it was like dead on. I was like, wow, this is impressive. But then you read stuff that's completely false. And then I read a lot of contradictions within the same text. I am this, but I'm also the exact opposite. And so it all boils down to these Barnum statements, right? After P.T. Barnum, where they're so general and there are so many contradictions within them. You're like this, but you're also the opposite of this at times, that you can always find yourself in those descriptions.
Well, and this is really the phenomenon of cold reading. And you feed people back information that you've gleaned from them. And also, if you say enough things and one of them happens to hit, that's the one they'll remember. They'll forget the 99 others that were meaningless. So, Debbie, when someone comes into emergency, do you ask them if they are a Capricorn or a Cancer?
Absolutely. I use it to guide my treatment.
Right.
Yes.
Can I just say we have a few questions on Facebook and some very nice comments, but one is talking about the new rapid testing that was just approved. Do you want to talk about that? I mean, is that being administered now? Is it accurate? Will it be accurate?
Well, the question of accuracy, is always what is the sensitivity and what is the specificity? That is, how likely are you to get a positive test that's real, and how likely you are to get a negative test. And the data is that I've looked at is not all that comforting, because they're talking between 95, 97%, which is not really what you'd like to see. Jonathan, I know you've looked into this extensively.
This particular test, not extensively, no. I looked at it very briefly. I think it's the Abbott test. I think it takes about 15 minutes. It's an antigen test, so it detects part of the virus itself. So, I mean, it can be useful in certain places where they don't have access to a lab. I think that's the biggest thing, is that if you are far away from major cities and major healthcare centers, major laboratories, the current PCR-based test, a swab, it requires a laboratory to extract the nucleic acids, to run the PCR and all of that. So this test is a way of doing it on location without the need of a lab. As Joe mentioned, it is not perfect. I think one of the best tests that I've seen is the antibody test, but that you need to have been infected for a little while to build up enough antibodies for them to be detected. That has a very high sensitivity, very high specificity. This new test, this rapid test, it is not as sensitive. I think the specificity is very, very high, but the sensitivity is not quite as high as we would like it to be. I think it will have its uses. It's not perfect. And again, it takes 15 minutes. But yeah, for remote locations, I think they will find a lot of use out of that.
Something that hasn't been emphasized enough is that this test, this Abbott test, is indicated only within 7 days of the onset of symptoms.
Yeah.
So it's only for symptomatic people. This is not something that you go and test yourself to see whether or not you've been exposed. And I think that has gotten lost in all of the words, that have been spilled out over there.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
exactly. So there's a category of tests, the swabs and this one, the Abbott rapid test, that are useful for a short period of time to see if you have the virus right now. But then as you get rid of the virus, the test is no longer valid. And then you have this other category of tests like the antibody test or the blood test to see if you have antibodies against the virus. Those are not very useful in the early days of when you're infected because you haven't produced antibodies yet, but they are useful afterwards to see if you have been in contact with the virus and if you have develop these antibodies. So those are two categories of tests, and indeed it is important not to mix them up.
And then there's the normal test that you go take if you're asymptomatic, right? If you just got nervous or you wanted to just check.
Well, that's that first category of tests. So it's a swab, and it will look for part of the virus itself. But again, after you've cleared the virus, that test will come back negative, and that's when you look for antibodies.
But at least Debbie, you were telling me in your hospital, you get the results from the PCR test back quickly.
Yes, we get them back quickly, sometimes less quickly than others. As you can imagine now, we're testing a lot more. So also bear that in mind that we're getting a lot more positives, but we're also testing a lot more. So it's definitely taking some more time. I know that the big rate limiting step for people in the community is getting their hands on their results. So there's a lot of kind of like misinformation about how you go about and get your results. So depending on where you've done your test, the test center themselves should call you or email you or text you, whatever it is that they have told you that they will do, because different clinics will have different practices. So they should get back to you and tell you whether you're negative or positive. Although I'm hearing a lot from people that they're not getting these results in a timely fashion, which obviously is causing a lot of trouble because when you're waiting for a test result, you are in quarantine. So that's a big issue. But public health will only call you if your test result is positive. And the problem right now is that public health is completely overwhelmed and they can't keep up. They cannot keep up. And I think that the reason why our numbers in Quebec are so high is because there's a lot of weakness in the contact tracing. I think that public health is in over their heads and they can hardly keep up with the positives. So definitely never mind the negatives. Don't expect to be called. But that it's contact tracing is so important. And this month, the idea also of kind of this quasi quarantine is to limit your contacts, and then there will be no need for contact tracing because you are interacting with fewer and fewer people. So that's where the big issue is really with contact tracing. I think that's why our numbers are so high. And I also think
now we have the app.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So I wanted to mention the app. I'm glad you brought it up. Please download the app.
It's called COVID Alert.
Is this the Canada-wide one, right?
Yes. And
Great.
so finally, Quebec has adopted it. I've had it downloaded for months now, but it hasn't been working because Quebec has just activated it now. I don't know why it took them so long, but anyhow.
Because we're Quebec.
Because we're Quebec.
Yeah.
So download it and it works with Bluetooth, and it'll basically, somebody who is, it does rely on people though, because when you are positive, you do need to call in and get a code to enter in, and then it will alert anybody who had been in a certain radius of you. But again, we're relying on other people. We're relying on people being responsible and acting like responsible adults. And this is something that has clearly been difficult for people to do. So please download the app and please be responsible. And, if you are positive, I would recommend that you yourself call up every single contact that you've had and inform them that you're positive. I know that public health is overwhelmed, and I know that I have spoken to patients myself that have been positive and have not received a phone call from public health. So I definitely urge everybody to, take that extra step to be a socially responsible person and call up people and let them know that you're positive and that they should go and get tested if they've been in close contact with you. And so close contact doesn't mean, if you were standing for more than 6 feet away from them for, a couple of minutes, that's not considered close contact. Close contact is going to be in a distance closer than 6 feet, talking for a prolonged period of time. Generally, the 15-minute rule is used. But again, these are all kind of random numbers. And I think that what I wanted to say before is that I think that the big issue that we have here is that the Quebec government, in all of their updates, I went back before and I reread, what's been happening over the past couple of months. And so many of them are, Legault talks about using your judgment. And I think that this is ridiculous because we know people, first of all, one person's judgment is not the same as the other. And I can tell you that I most certainly do not rely on the majority of people's judgments, because I don't think that people have good judgment. And people need more than that. And, to simply say to you, to throw out these, esoteric rules and that make no sense. And so people could just kind of throw everything up in the air and say, I give up. And I don't think that's the way to do it. I think we need to have a clear, concise, consistent message from the top. And I think that that's how we're going to get through this. And I saw a couple of people were asking about schools. And I do want to mention that I do believe, and I've said this from August when kids were starting to go back to school, I think that kids should be wearing masks in schools. I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever to force people to wear masks in enclosed spaces, to make that mandatory. But in the classroom setting, for some magical, maybe astronomical reason, maybe there's some Mars sign, I don't know what, but how
Venus was in Scorpio, and that screws everything up.
Well, how does it make sense?
Well, I think if there is an argument, it's because we believe that children, like below the age of teenagers, that children are not as likely to carry the virus, not as likely to get sick.
But that has actually been disproven.
Argument.
That I don't think.
I know. I'm not saying that it is completely true. I'm just saying that's the only argument that's been put forward.
Even if it was, right? Even if it's true that children don't carry it as much, which may very, I don't know. I don't think the end result is we don't know a whole lot. But even if it's true, why not just ask them to wear a mask? I mean, I'm not saying to punish children if they don't wear a mask. I'm not asking anybody to be fined if they don't wear a mask. And you know what? If some children don't wear it, fine. But I think that we have managed to normalize masks in the adult population. I really do think that we can do that in the children's population. And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Especially when they're so easy, like they adopt new behaviors very easily. You can make it a fun thing for them.
Absolutely.
Wash your hands, grab your mask, let's go out.
You're trying to deprive them of their freedom.
You can't rely on kids to do it properly and all of that.
No, and no one's asking them.
Even if that's true, so what? So what?
Exactly.
I mean, you do your best. This is not an all or nothing.
It's about reducing risk.
Yeah.
Listen, if a child sneezes and they forget to sneeze into their elbow, at least if they're wearing a mask, you've successfully limited the spread of droplets. So, I really think that I encourage my kids to wear masks, and they don't mind it. I have to say, they don't mind it. Like you said, you make it fun. There's tons of masks now that are available with fun, themes to them. And I think that should have been put into place in the beginning. And I think that the gathering should have been limited. We should have taken 10 steps back in September. And I don't think we would be finding ourselves in the same place that we are now had we done that.
We have two questions I want to bring up. Okay. One's on Facebook saying, asking is there ever talk about a third wave, or would the second plateau? My answer is I hope that there will be a vaccine, like, in April, May, that might be approved by the actual, health approvers. Is there any talk about a third wave? We never even got that far.
Yeah, good God. I mean, give us a break. No,
Yeah.
I think that we were well in the second wave. It was expected. We knew it was coming. I mean, if there is going to be a third wave, hopefully people will have learned from their mistakes. But I think
let's ride this wave.
I think it's too optimistic to think that there's a vaccine coming that early, to be completely honest.
And even a vaccine. I mean, a vaccine will not be 100% efficacious. It will not be rolled out all at once. It will be rolled out in waves, and there are people who will refuse it. So it will be part of a strategy, but it will not be the be all end all.
I mean, given the fact that they're willing to say vaccine 50% efficacy is okay, which is a very low bar.
Yeah.
Plus you have right now about 30% of the population saying they won't take the vaccine no matter what. So the vaccine is not going to be the answer. This is not the goose with the golden egg.
No, what got me excited was just because yesterday I listened to the Daily, and they had a very good episode that I'm going to include in our newsletter with their health. I think he's a doctor and he reports for the Times. And he was saying that a vaccine coming by the election or right after the election and approved by, President Trump is not going to make him even go and take the vaccine. But based on the clinical trials in the stage 3 and everything that is happening actually, he thought by late spring, early summer that a vaccine could be approved by the Faucis and the Paul Offits and everything, which then got me a little hopeful. And maybe
I mean, there will be a number of vaccines that will be rolled out and approved, but that doesn't mean that they have been shown to be effective. It just means that there's enough evidence to suggest that they are safe and that they actually can trigger some immune reaction. There's going to be no evidence that this can stop the pandemic in the near future. So I think, this is pie in the sky.
And even there, like, how long will immunity last with the
Exactly.
vaccine? Will we need a new one every year, like we do with the flu, because or a booster shot? So there are lots of question marks out there.
Speaking of the flu,
most of the vaccines that are being tested now are using booster shots within a couple of months. So anyway.
Hold on, I want to just mention about the flu, because I think a lot of people...
did you kill the fly that was on Mike Pence's hair? Is that what just
driving me crazy. There's like something in the air, right? I wanted to mention about the flu because I'm getting a lot of questions about the flu vaccine, and we don't have it in yet. It's estimated for end of October, first week of November. You're only going to be eligible to get it at the CLSC or at the pharmacies covered if you meet certain criteria, which I'm sure you can find on the web, like if you have any kind of immunosuppressed conditions. Or
is the criteria of being your father enough?
At the CLSC, no.
What about in your backyard?
End of nepotism.
Yeah.
So otherwise, if you have a family doctor, I know at my clinic, I'm offering it to my patients, as are the other family doctors in my clinic. And I definitely do encourage everybody to get the flu vaccine this year, as I do every year.
Okay, we're just about out of time. And Debbie, we were talking about mistaken judgment. I just want to leave people with this because I've been getting many questions over the last week about the wisdom of taking lavender pills and oil of oregano pills. This is because, again, it's all over the internet. There's a doctor actually who's recommending these, and sometimes doctors do go astray, which is dangerous because, of course, people respect whatever they say. There's absolutely no evidence that taking lavender pills or oregano pills does anything for COVID. Although I had one guy call me last week and say, I had this dry cough, and I started to take the lavender pills and the oregano pills, and within a day it went away. And he, of course, was convinced that it was because of this. This is the kind of anecdotal evidence, and we've talked often about correlation is not the same as causation, but these beliefs are out there. And again, as I said, whenever science doesn't have the answer, the quacks will rush in and fill that vacuum.
People want quick fixes.
Yes. So Jonathan, maybe I'll send you the lavender.
Sure.
So
it can't hurt. I'll smell better. I'll smell better, I'm sure.
It will cure your. I bet you I send this to you and you don't even have to take it. And by next week, this time, your cough will be gone.
Well, that's how homeopathy works. If I don't take it, then I'm taking the maximum dose I could possibly.
Exactly. Okay, I think we have exhausted our time here. So thanks for everyone.
I just want to say we are taking a little bit of a 3-week hiatus while some things on the back end and with the everything. So when we do come back, it's October 29th. It'll be after our Schwarcz symposium.
Oh, yeah, quickly mention the symposium.
So even though we're going away or on hiatus for 3 weeks, you can actually, we're not. So tune in October 19th, Monday, and October 26th is also a Monday. All the information is on our website. October 19th, we have Brendan Nyhan and Britt Hermes, former naturopath, and Brendan's talking about fake news. And the next week, we have Wendy Zuckerman, who's a science journalist, talking about journalism in the pandemic and science in the pandemic, and Anthony Warner talking about misinformation about food and hunger. It's really going to be good. Please go on our website, RSVP, watch the video. It's free. It's at noon. They will be available to watch after if you can't tune in at noon, but join us and we'll see you there.
So although it will not be the same as being there in person, I think it's going to be still just as informative and just as entertaining. And we have 4 really high quality speakers, and we'll dissect the whole problem of in whom do we trust besides the group that we gather here on these websites. Okay, so thanks everyone, and thanks Debbie, and we will see all of you in at the symposium in 1 week from Monday, right?
Yeah, 1 week Monday, the 19th.
From Monday, and with this format 3 weeks from today. Okay,
thank you.
bye everyone.
Bye.